Welcome to MIC 300 Study Session 1, Introduction to Medical Microbiology, Properties and Classification of Microorganisms. Introduction. Microbiology is the study of microorganisms. Microorganisms may be bacteria, viral, parasites, and fungi. They are free-living and they may be of benefit to both animals and plants. For example, microorganisms break down and convert organic matter to carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur, which are beneficial to animals and plants. Characteristics of a prokaryotic microorganism. They have a simple cell structure, e.g. bacteria, rickettsia, chlamydia, and mycoplasma. They also have genetic material, is not organized into a chromosome. Their nucleus lack a definite nuclear membrane. They also multiply by a simple dividing process called binary fission. They lack specialized organelles such as mitochondria. Features of a eukaryotic cell. They have a complex cell structure similar to that of higher animals. Examples are protozoa and fungi. Their genetic material is differentiated into chromosomes which are contained in a nuclear membrane to form a definite nucleus. They have complex organelles like mitochondria, which helps them to make their own energy. They multiply by a process called mitosis. Classification of microorganisms. Prokaryote microorganisms include bacteria, mycoplasma, rickettsia. Eukaryote microorganisms include viruses, fungi, protozoa. Learning outcomes for study session 1. At the end of this study session, you should have learned the following: host-parasite relationship. Secondly, disease progression. Thirdly, epidemiology. Then lastly, morbidity or mortality. Host-parasite relationship. A parasite is an organism that makes its living at the expense of another organism. So in a broad sense, all human pathogens fall under the blanket term parasite. A parasite derives its nutrients and ecosystem from the host and is able to grow and reproduce in this environment. Normal flora. The normal microbial flora of human body is located mainly in the superficial layers and gastrointestinal tract. Gastrointestinal pathogens have some resistance to gastric acid and bile, and agents of skin infections are resistant to drying. Lower respiratory and upper urogenital tracts are sterile normally, but they are susceptible to microbial invasion from adjacent sites. Contamination. This occurs when microbes come into contact with host surfaces. Colonization. The skin of a newborn infant is populated initially by the organism carried in the urogenital tract of the mother and acquired by the baby at birth. The mother's skin and breath are additional form of normal bacteria that become the infant's commensal population, especially the mucosal normal flora. The oral cavity. Many of the normal flora can be disease-causing organisms under the right condition. Viridans streptococci are largely responsible for dental caries and pitting of tooth enamel by Streptococcus mutant. Acidic metabolic byproduct is well documented. Beneficial effects. Vitamin synthesis and biopigment degradation are two beneficial effects provided by bacteria to the host. Bacteroids species make vitamin K and degrade intestinal bile. Disease progression. The period of total infection is from the point of first contact until point of complete elimination of the pathogen. Overt disease is associated with the onset of symptoms. In a recurrent infection, the disease reappears over time with a characteristic rise and fall of agent shedding and symptomatic disease. The seropositive phase occurs where the patient has been exposed to a pathogen and has mounted an antibody response that is reflected in detectable level of specific serum immunoglobulin. Incubation is defined as the period from the point of first contact until the point of appearance of symptoms of infection, that is, when disease is present. Latent infections remain dormant and then re-emerge after stress or a lapse in immune function. During the period of communicability, the infectious agent is being continuously shared by the patient. To complete the cycle of infection, infectious agents are excreted, and the route of excretion dictates the mechanism of spread. Fecal-oral spread involves excretion within stool samples and may be aided by diarrhea. Pathogens are often aerosolized in respiratory secretions by sneezing and coughing. STD agents are transmitted by sexual contact with vaginal, cervical, or urethral fluids. Zoonotic infections are diverse and causes diseases where humans are either a part of normal infectious cycle or accidental host by contact with vectors or reservoir animals. Pathogen virulence mechanism. Host-parasite interaction can be described as pathogenic versus non-pathogenic. Pathogenicity is the ability to cause disease or multiply within a host, or invasive as opposed to a successful commensal avirulent status quo. That is, the human as an ecological niche. Virulence is a concept of degree of pathogenicity. Some viruses and other pathogenic microbes characteristically cause disease, and these may be expressed highly specific adhesions or toxins. Virulence is mediated by the strength of attachment phenomena. Specifically, pathogenic strains of Escherichia coli have capsular antigen K1 that makes the bacteria neurotrophic. Most strains of E. coli are harmless commensals organisms that occupy space in the human gastrointestinal tract. Firstly, inhibition of host immune mediators. Inhibiting host immune cells products to block the antimicrobial response are a strategy of many pathogens. The epidemiology. Epidemiology is the study of disease pattern and trends, of the occurrence, distribution, control of disease in population. It also deals with disease tracking and prevention. Disease transmission is the movement of infectious agent from one host to another. Modes of transmission. Numerous modes of transmission contribute to the spread of human disease. For an infectious agent to persist within a population, a cycle of transmission must be established, leading from a contaminated to a susceptible host and further propagating through the population. Composite diagram illustrates the various modes and routes of disease transmission. Direct infection is the movement of a pathogen from human to human. Routes of transmission. The direct route may be physical contact between humans or between a human and an animal to cause disease. Portals of entry include the gastrointestinal tract, respiratory mucosa, genital mucosa, and direct inoculation through the skin. Mucous membranes are especially important. STDs are transmitted in this way. Morbidity and mortality. Morbidity is the number of cases or the incidence of a specific disease per unit population. Cases per 100,000. Mortality is the number of deaths due to a specific disease per unit population. That is, death per 100,000. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention publishes the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, MMWR, a monthly journal that documents the important disease trend in the United States. Disease definition. A cluster of cases in a specific area or a single household is termed as outbreak and is usually related to a local exposure. An increase in case incidence over a larger region, perhaps an entire state or country, is described as an epidemic. CDC Emerging Infectious Priority Issues. The following are emerging infections: antimicrobial resistance, opportunistic infections, food and water safety, vectors and animal health, blood safety, infections that cause chronic disease, vaccine development for malaria, rotavirus, and influenza virus, mental and child health, lastly, health of travelers and refugees. Pathogens and their disease pairs. Staphylococcus aureus paired with staphylococcal toxic shock syndrome. Streptococcus pyogenes paired with strep sore throat. Streptococcus pneumoniae paired with otitis media and pneumococcal pneumonia. Neisseria gonorrhea paired with sexually transmitted infection. Neisseria meningitis paired with meningitis legionella. Pneumophilia paired with Legionnaire disease. In summary, in this study session, you should have learned, firstly, host-parasite relationship. A parasite is an organism that makes its living at the expense of another organism. So, in a broad sense, all human pathogens fall under the blanket term parasite. A parasite derives its nutrients and ecosystem from the host and is able to grow and reproduce in this environment. The disease progression. The period of total infection is from the point of first contact until point of complete elimination of the pathogen. Overt disease is associated with the onset of symptoms. In a recurrent infection, the disease reappears over time with a characteristic rise and fall of agent shedding and symptomatic disease. The epidemiology, which is the study of disease patterns and trends of the occurrence, distribution, and control of disease in population. It also deals with disease tracking and prevention. Disease transmission is the movement of the infectious agent from one host to another. Come to the end of study session 1. Thank you.